Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. Today's episode is a guest episode, except that I am the guest. This is yet one of those other episodes where I was interviewed on a podcast, and the owner of that podcast said, hey, if you want to share it with your tribe, then you can do it. So let me give you a little preview about today's episode. So the podcast is called the Seaworthy Podcast, and the host is Andrew Verboncouer. Andrew is the co-founder at a company called Headway. Headway is up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and they work with companies and help build digital applications. So some of their more notable clients are companies like Roostify and the University of Illinois. So they do some really cool stuff. And most importantly, I think for me, is they've been clients of ours now for about 4 years. And so Andrew and I had a conversation around startup sales. And specifically what we talked about was selling on the problem that you solve as opposed to what your product does. And so Andrew and I talked for about 45 minutes or so around this theme. In the course of the conversation, we talked a little bit about my background, not just in sales, but some of the endurance racing that I do and some of how that translates into startups and the world of startups. And then we dove into some tactical strategies around sales, as you might imagine. So that's really it for the preview. Let's head over my conversation with Andrew Verboncouer over at the Seaworthy Podcast. Hope you enjoy and listen for more of these episodes coming up soon. All right, that's it for now. Scott Sambucci signing off so that you can listen to Scott Sambucci getting interviewed. See ya.
I'm excited to have Scott Sambucci on the show with me today. Scott's the founder and chief sales geek of SalesQualia, a company helping startups build successful sales systems and teams. Welcome to Seaworthy, Scott. Thanks for coming.
Hey, dude, awesome to be here.
Yeah. We've, just for everyone listening, we've worked together for, I'm trying to think, about 3 years almost now. Just 3 years. It's been great. I think we met at Owner Summit, which is an agency meetup, agency type conference. We were in San Diego at the time and have been working with Scott and his team and just really believe in their approach, the human side of sales. I think sales gets a bad rap. I think Scott does a really great job, as you'll see, of demystifying that and really bringing, the human elements into the sales process and really trying to genuinely help people. And for anyone that's listening, that's your goal, in creating a product around something, is solving a valuable problem for somebody and, trying to find those customers that can really benefit from what you're offering. And so excited for this conversation. Before we get started, Scott, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, where you went to school, and just who Scott Sambucci is?
Oh, it all started now. I think the short version, the bullet point version is I've been doing enterprise sales for 25 years. Right out of college, I started doing enterprise B2B sales. And over the course of the last almost 20 years now, I've been in Silicon Valley. I've worked with 3 different B2B technology startups, growing each of those companies from virtually zero revenue to their first couple $1 million in revenue, most recently with a company called Blend, which is in the mortgage lending space. And now with SalesQualia, starting about 10 years ago on a part-time basis, and now over the last 5 years on as a full-time basis, we work with B2B startups and tech companies and companies that want to build a more repeatable, scalable sales process. And that's the focus of our work every day.
Yeah, that's great. You also spent some time in, teaching students in university and business schools.
Yeah, I sort of backed into that. I was, so even trying to think now, trying to put together the dates and the episodes of my life, there was a time where I took a break from startups. So I was working at my first startup was called Applia, which is founded by a guy named Paul Romer. Anybody who's in the world of economics might recognize that name. Paul Romer recently won the Nobel Prize for economics. And but back in 2001, he started a tech startup, an EdTech startup. And I worked with him for a couple of years and really got to love economics as a field. And so much so that I decided to leave Applia and I went back to a graduate program in economics at the University of San Francisco. And part of the degree required going internationally to do some field research. And so, long story short, I ended up in a country of Kazakhstan. And while I was in Kazakhstan, I was hosted at a university there they needed somebody to teach some finance courses. I have an MBA in finance from Duke University. And they said, hey, can you teach finance? And I said, well, I don't know, but willing to give it a try. And that led to my doing some adjunct teaching. And since over the years, I've now taught at a couple of different universities, most recently at a program called HULT, International School of Business. And it's just something I kind of do to fill in the time, give back a little bit. And I just enjoy being in a teaching position, whether that's coaching our clients or teaching students to help them learn stuff that they want to learn.
Yeah, I think that ties into a lot of, our approach here at Headway for Sales, and some of what we've learned from you and your team is, if you can educate clients and teach and have conversations about elevating what they're doing and what some best practices are, that's really the best selling. It's not, the salesman that's knocking on your door trying to pressure you to buy. It's helping someone realize that, you have a potential problem and there's a solution that you can offer to help alleviate or reach their goals or something. I think it's, some of the best salespeople are great teachers. And so I think that isn't a coincidence that you've had that experience and, in our, history together and working with you and your team. So yeah, that's really cool. What types of things keep you busy outside of work and outside of sales and teaching?
Well, two people keep me really busy. One is my wife and one is my son. So my wife is a PhD from UC Davis. So she's an agricultural behavioral economist, behavioral economist. And so she does some consulting work and she's a project scientist on campus at UC Davis. If you asked her though, what she really loves to do, it's flying. So she's a certified flight instructor. And so she teaches people how to fly airplanes. I asked her how the day went. She said, well, I prevented somebody from dying about 3 times today. Wow. So that keeps her pretty busy, and that keeps me busy making sure that she gets to follow that hobby and that passion of hers. And my son is 8 years old, so he does all the stuff that 8-year-olds do, which is, sports and gymnastics, and he's now doing rock climbing and jujitsu. So staying busy with him outside of work, trying to keep up with him, which is pretty tough. And for me personally, probably the one thing I do more than anything outside of work is ultra running and endurance events. So I started off doing triathlons about 10, 11 years ago. Eventually did a couple of Ironmans. After the Ironman stuff, I got kind of burned out on triathlon. So I switched over to just doing very unique long distance endurance events. As an example, I swam the Catalina Channel, which is a 24-mile swim. And I swam across Lake Tahoe, which is an 11-mile swim. And over the last few years, I've been mostly focused on ultra running. So doing ultramarathons, anything that's a 50K or longer. And most of the races that I tend to focus on are 100 and 200-mile races.
That's pretty impressive. We have, I think we've talked about this before, but Tommy, a developer on our team, is into ultras, and he, to my surprise, does not listen to music or anything in these. I was curious, do you listen to music, podcasts, anything? Are you kind of in nature?
Ironic question in some capacity. I've never listened to music while I've been running or training or during races, except for the most recent race I did. So back in early February, I did a 100-mile ultramarathon down in New Zealand called the Tarawera 100. And for whatever reason, when I was packing up and getting ready for the weeks and days leading into the race, I decided, I'm going to bring headphones just in case I feel like I need them. And I've never felt like I wanted them before. I never felt like I needed them, but I don't use a pacer for the 100-mile races. A lot of people will pick up what they call a pacer, somebody who can run with you the last 30 or 40 miles. I've never used a pacer for a 100-mile race. Part of it is logistics, and it's just like one more thing to worry about. Part of it is I like the mental aspect of just doing it on my own. And so I do know by doing these races a couple of times, I hit a lull, like a low spot around the 70, 80-mile mark. By then it's late at night. You've been going for 16 hours and it just gets hard. And so I packed these earphones, and right around mile 70, I think it was, or 60, I remembered I had them, and I pulled them out and I pulled up a Spotify playlist and I listened to that thing for a good 15, 20 miles of the race. And it was probably the one thing that really helped me the most avoid this crash of ineptitude and like questioning why the hell am I doing? What am I doing out here? So got some Eminem tracks on there and
Yeah.
some Disney tunes and Imagine Dragons. It's a pretty wide range of stuff, but it definitely kept me going on the trail. So that's the one time and only one time so far that I've ever used music on a race or while I've been training.
Well, yeah, I imagine, a lot of people run, a lot shorter distances to clear their head and you're not listening to anything but, 10, 20 minutes at max. When you're thinking about 16 to 36 hours, in your own head, you have to, you got to coach yourself. I'm sure you got to make sure that you're in it and, kind of check yourself as you're running. Yeah.
Well, a lot of it is just, if people could check out some of the stuff I've done, like posted on LinkedIn or some of the blog posts or people on my email list, I oftentimes will relate the ultra running and the endurance events to sales and running a startup and growing a company, growing a team, because it's easy to feel very overwhelmed with the idea of doing 100 miles, or in my case, I've done 200-mile races. And so if you sit there and say, like, how am I going to run 200 miles over the next 3 days? It feels like an impossible task because frankly, it kind of is. It's not, but it is in some ways. You can't really get your head around it. And so one of the mantras in ultra running is this concept of station to station. So there's frequently aid stations along the way. And so they can be anywhere from 5 to 10 miles apart, sometimes 20 miles apart if it's a longer race. And really the way to run these races is just to segment the race down and say, okay, well, I'm at mile 45, the next aid station's at mile 53. And I know what the terrain is like. I have an elevation map. It's going to be 2,000 feet of climbing and then some downhill. And then it's going to be some technical terrain next to this lake. And you just tell yourself, okay, well, this next segment's probably going to take me about 3 hours. And I'm just going to focus on getting to the next aid station. I'm going to focus on getting to the top of the climb. And then I'm going to enjoy the 2 miles downhill. And then when it comes to get technical, just accept that it's going to be slow. And there's nothing I can do about the fact that there's rocks and roots and trees in the way. Just sort of go with it. And then you pull into the next aid station and you feel really good because you finally see people and light and food. And you sort of celebrate for a moment and say, okay, I made it. And then you think, what's the next aid station? So I think just listening to that, I'm sure a lot of people can appreciate how much that's just like running a company or building a product or working on an enterprise sales deal. It's a very long process. And if you try to think about the entire process at once, it's too overwhelming. The best thing you can do is just break it down and think about what are the obstacles in the way that I need to do now. Let's focus on now and worry about later.
Yeah. And I think, part of that's the rush you get, if you're in sales of hitting quota or passing quota, but the realization that you now have the same or more effort kind of ahead of you, depending on your company's trajectory, to really keep yourself in it, keep your team in it, and understand that it's a ultra marathon, not a sprint by any means.
Yeah. And that rush is so short and fleeting. I mean, even in the race, whenever you get to the next aid station, or even when you reach the finish line, I mean, there's certainly a rush that you feel like, man, it's over. A lot of times for me, I'll get to the finish line and I'll just break down in tears because I get overwhelmed with emotion. And what I've come to realize is that that buzz or that feeling isn't because I hit the finish line. It's me feeling this sense of celebration of all of the work that went into it. I mean, there's the age-old phrase about the journey is the joy, and hitting that finish line or converting that customer that you've been working on. Yeah, it's this rush of feeling great. This is awesome. We get to celebrate. The real celebration is because you put in the work, you put in the effort, you did the planning, you did all the right things. You got a good team to help you out when you needed it. You put together a plan of action that allowed you to get to that place. That's really, at least for me, that's how I've always felt. That's the reason you feel that, not because it's like this rush of adrenaline. Because if all you're trying to do is get rushes of adrenaline, you're never going to be able to find enough to keep yourself up. And so that's why you have to really enjoy that journey, whether even if it's a long 2,000-foot climb or a really technical part. You just accept it and enjoy it and say, this is where I want to be. I chose to be here. I'm doing hard things. And this is probably really hard. And when I get to the next aid station, I'm going to be done with this part. And that's what I celebrate. Then you refuel and you feel a sense of accomplishment. I did that. And now I know I can do more. And then you just keep pushing.
Yeah, I think that's a big factor in why people keep going with their startup or end up quitting is believing in the impact and the process to get there, and day to day, putting in the work, pounding the pavement. And so I think that's something that I've seen, as we've been working together with other teams that have joined, is really what impact do you want to make? And I think that's so important, even for our work as as an agency, of understanding where do people want to go, and, not just with the product, but in life, in their goals, and how is this a part of that? Because there is no work-life balance. Everything kind of, it just is, and you have to prioritize, and, especially with a family and a product and with competing things, you have to decide what you want, what your legacy is going to be and how this is part of that. So, yeah, I think that's huge. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about SalesQualia and the story of starting it? And, we know a little bit about, your sales experience before that, but why, maybe why did you feel it was time to go out on your own, and how did everything get started?
Yeah, so the start of the company was a confluence of a couple of different things that all just kind of happened at one time. So number one, I was at the time I was the chief operating officer, the COO at Altos Research. So this is going back to 2011, about 10 years ago. And so as a COO, I started off just doing all of the sales, and then eventually growing the sales team and customer support team around me and beneath me, and then continued to just manage more and more of the day-to-day functions and priorities and operations of the company in addition to sales. And so part of that, of course, was building and continuing to manage an entire sales team. So as I started thinking about, well, how am I going to teach this team to take over enterprise sales and sell to companies like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, I don't have like a playbook other than me doing it here at this company and our founder doing it. And so that was the first sort of event, is this realization, like, I got to figure out a way to teach these new salespeople how to do what we do, because I need them to be just as effective as me if we're going to keep growing. So that was part one. Part two was at that time, while I was at Altos, I was commuting from Davis, California down to Mountain View. So I mentioned my wife earlier, and at the time she was working on her PhD and here at UC Davis, or here in Davis at UC Davis. And so I would commute to Mountain View. I'd go down usually like on a Sunday or Monday, stay for a few nights, and then come back home on a Thursday. She was doing her PhD studies. We didn't have kids at the time, so it was no big deal. I could just disappear and she didn't notice because she was doing her research. And I was staying at a hotel for a while, and then eventually I found a spot in a startup house near Stanford. And it was like one of those things you would imagine, where I think there was something like 12 or 13 different people living in this house, and 3 or 4 startups all working from this house. So I just got to know some of the teams there. And this one team was working on a product for the enterprise. It was a pricing engine product for retailers. And it just was sort of like following them on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things I realized is that this team of really, really smart dudes were very focused on the product. They kept worried about, like, okay, well, we're going to change the button. The button's going to be blue now. Or look, we've added this dashboard, or we've got this new integration. And I kept asking them, like, hey, so have you talked to any customers? And like, well, no, we're just kind of working on that. And this one customer said, if we do this, then maybe they'll buy. And I was like, dude, you guys, you got to like sell this thing. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of going on the side while I was trying to figure out how to teach these guys at Altos. I say guys because they happen to all be men at that time. And then, so the third thing that was the third event was, I was reading at the time, one of the blogs I was reading is a guy named James Altucher, which now he's gotten pretty popular, but about 10 years ago, he's just started to do a lot of blogging. And he had been writing about this concept of writing your own book and choose yourself and, becoming your own authority voice. And so I was reading his blog post, and I thought, well, he basically did a blog post on how to self-publish a book. I was like, I can write a book. I've always wanted to write a book. So those 3 things all happening at one time, I decided, well, let me just start taking some notes in Evernote about what I would teach somebody if they needed to learn sales and never had done sales before. And the outcome of that over a course of a month was the first book that I self-published, called Startup Selling: How to Sell If You Really, Really Have to and Don't Know How. So the book then led to an invitation to teach some workshops, including the Lean Startup Conference, and taught a sales workshop there. Worked with a guy named Sean Murphy on that workshop. So I had that opportunity to start teaching. Then, because other startup groups knew that I taught at the Lean Startup Conference, they said, hey, could you run that workshop with our group? And so I would go do other workshops. And then every time I do a workshop, after the workshop, somebody would come up to me and say, hey, that was a really good workshop. Do you ever coach people on like how to implement the stuff that you're teaching? And of course, my answer was, sure, of course I do. And so I picked up some coaching clients, just doing some one-on-one coaching here and there on the side while working at Altos. And that was just kind of this genesis. So I never really intended to like, hey, on this day, I'm going to start this company that's going to be focused on sales coaching for startups. It was just an evolution that started with this confluence of events, started doing workshops, which led to coaching clients. And over the course of about 4 or 5 years, I built up enough sort of, relationships and clients and some teaching opportunities that allowed me to step aside from, at the time, it was the head of sales at Blend, to then make this my full-time work. So that's the origin story.
Yeah. So how is it? You mentioned you started in 2011. When did you get started kind of full time, where you decided to go out and leave Blend? And
yeah, so I my first official full-time day was October 1st, 2015. Yeah. So October. So it's been about 4.5 years.
Yeah.
So I was doing on the side about 4 years, I guess, 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah. How's SalesQualia different today than back then when you started full time?
So back then it was just, show up to a shared workspace or some startup group. There's a lean startup group. A friend of mine named Tristan Cromer, he would run these lean startup meetups, and he had me to come in and do workshops. So I'd come in, show up at like a Tuesday night, and teach from 6 to 9. And that was it. I mean, I would just kind of leave. Sometimes people would ask about getting some coaching help, and I would have a phone call with them every week or every couple weeks just to answer the questions. It was just a very rudimentary, like the most basic form of a coaching practice, which is teach stuff, find a client, teach that client stuff. And there really was no system or strategy in place. It was just a matter of, I'm going to try to help out some people and make some side income. As I started thinking about, moving away from Blend, it was a hard decision for a couple of reasons. One, because Blend was exploding with its growth. I knew the founders of the company. They're personal friends of mine that asked me to come run sales there. So on a personal level, it was a hard decision. On a business level, it was a hard decision. But what made it actually easy was the fact that at the time, my son was about 1.5 years, 2 years old. And my wife was still working on her PhD at this time. And the first time my son had to go to the hospital, it wasn't anything serious, but it was one of those things when you have a 2-year-old and they're sick and they can't breathe because they have a really bad cold. You got to take them to the ER because that's what you do.
Yeah.
And I remember getting this text message from my wife standing outside of a BW3s in Dallas, Texas. Not even Dallas. I think it was Louisville or Lewiston. I forget the name of it. It's like some suburb of Dallas. There, I was about to meet my team for dinner, and it was about 6 o'clock at night. And she just said, "Ben was really sick. I got to take him to the hospital." And I always get a little emotional on this because it's just always so vivid. And I just remember feeling so helpless. There I am doing the startup thing, and it's fun and it's exciting, and we're doing all the things on the business side that, it's like the dream job. You're with a great team and a great product and a huge market opportunity and well-funded customers that love you. But yet as like a dad and a husband, I'm not there. And that just really sucked. In that moment, I got to figure something out because this just can't go. And it was only going to get worse. The more the company grew, I was only going to be traveling more and the demands were going to get even greater. So it took me a good, once we made the decision, I say we because my wife and I talked about this, it took a good 10 months of time from the time I said, look, I got to make a change to the point where I could actually leave. And so in that time, a big focus was, how do I build some systems myself? Like, how am I going to go? I can't just like hope to get a workshop and hope to get clients at the end of the workshop. I can't just kind of do a bunch of one-on-one calls with people because that's super time consuming and it's not really that effective. Like, how am I going to sell what I do? How am I going to maintain this? How am I going to grow from a one-person operation? And so I spent about 10 months just starting to build systems for lead gen and starting to build systems for how can I coach more clients at one time? How can I get them teaching each other? And so through that process, really as a forcing function to build a more repeatable process within my own system, within my own company. That got me to where we are now, which is, working with 30 teams at a time, having them come together for 2-day client events 3 times a year, doing coaching calls every week in small groups, doing some one-on-one stuff when we need to, Slack channel. I've got a team around me that's working with clients every single day, Slack messaging them, what do you need? What are you working on? Where are you stuck? Send me your outline, I'll take a look at it. And I've just found for us, it allows us to make a much bigger impact when we can help more teams. And so the big difference is going from that sort of, working from the kitchen table, single person coaching operation to actually having a company that has systems and repeatability and ability to support customers all over the world.
Hey, thanks for listening to the episode with Andrew Verboncouer and me talking sales. And the topic of the conversation today is around you should be selling based on the problem that you solve, not what your product does. And so speaking of problems that you solve, one of the problems that we solve, one of the problems that I am trying to help you solve as a startup seller is to help you ramp up and scale up your sales process. And focusing on the problem that your customers have is actually the first question in what I call the Q framework. The Q framework is a 7-question framework that you can use to analyze any sales opportunity, and it can also be the basis of your entire sales process. And so I cover the Q framework in specific detail in my most recent book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. So if you're listening to the podcast, if you're a recent listener and you haven't yet downloaded a copy of the book, make sure you grab a copy. The main title of the book is Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, and the subtitle is Ramp Up Your B2B Startups Repeatable Revenue with the Q Framework. Each chapter in the book is one of those 7 questions. And what I love most about the book, and the reason that I wrote it the way I did, is that it's not just a book that you're going to read from cover to cover. I built the book so that at the end of each chapter, there's specific exercises, as well as a web link out to worksheets that you can download and put everything that you're learning in each individual chapter to work for your startup. So make sure you do grab a copy of the book if you haven't already. If you bought a copy, I know a lot of people bought a copy on Amazon, either the Kindle version or the hard copy, but they haven't downloaded a copy of the PDF. You can still do that over at SalesQualia. That's our company website, SalesQualia, QUALIA.com/book. So that's salesqualia.com/book. So grab a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Chapter 2 is what problem are you solving? I'm looking at the book right now. It's been so long since I've actually cracked the book open. Actually, chapter 1 is what problem are you solving? Chapter 0 is the intro. Anyway, you get it. Get a copy of the book. Check out the Q framework. Put it to work for your B2B startup. And let's head back to my conversation with Andrew Verboncouer.
Yeah, you mentioned something before. One of the kind of initial ideas, or I guess, in the startup house, you were seeing people work on a product and they were focusing on the features and they were focusing on the product. And I think that, from our standpoint, we see that a lot with people that, hey, if I just build it, they'll come. If I just, I guess kind of contrast that to your prep before you went full time, taking a look at, hey, if I'm going to, be able to leave, I need to start mitigating some of the risk by gaining clients. I need to build a funnel. I need to prove that people are interested in this. And they'll engage with you the way that you're designing your services and that sort of thing. And I think when I think about how some startups miss the mark and end up failing, it's because they focus so much on the product and not enough on the people and the problem that they're having. Do you see that quite a bit, inbound when you're looking at clients to work with, and maybe kind of build that into what's one of the biggest mistakes you see startups make when it comes to lead gen or sales or
like so that? A lot of mistakes that come to mind. Building off of what you said, Andrew, I think the single biggest mistake, especially the earliest stage of a startup. So when you think about a startup's journey, we tend to group startups into one big bucket. You're a startup. Well, it's not necessarily true. It's like saying all kids are, the same. Well, they're not. There's first graders and second graders and third graders, and they learn different stuff as they go. And so I think about the life of a startup in 3 main phases. There's startup, truly like get out of the garage, build your first MVP, start selling your thing, start selling your stuff, and get your first 10 paying customers. You're just literally trying to get what I call problem product fit. there's a lot of talk about product market fit. Yeah, there's a market out there and our product solves a problem for that market. But before you get product market fit, you got to get product problem fit. Like, does somebody have a problem that they're willing to pay us money for to use this thing that we built? That's like true startup phase. Then we move into ramp up, which is, okay, now we have a couple customers, we got revenue in the door. We got to get some repeatability in how we generate leads and how we convert deals and how we price that and how we service that. So that's phase two, is we go from startup in phase one to phase two, which is ramp up. And that brings most companies to about $1 million or $2 million in revenue. And then it's scale time. Then it's scale up phase, phase three. And that's getting from 1 to 10, and then eventually from 10 to 100. And so for what I see the biggest mistake is those earliest stage companies, as you said, Andrew, they build this product and they take a very product led sales approach, meaning that they're, everything from their lead gen and their outbound messages are all about, hey, we built this product and the product does this, or we have this platform. We just had this conversation with one of our clients the other day where I said, well, how are you explaining to people what you do? And they said, well, we told them that we built like a continuous improvement platform. So what does that mean to somebody? Like, it doesn't mean anything. A continuous improvement platform is just this ambiguous tech thing that people feel like came from the show Silicon Valley. And so like we've got to get away from the product. Like, your customers, your prospects, they don't care about your product. They care about their problem. And so that's number one, they care about their problem. And number two, they care whether or not you really understand their problem. Like, can you talk about their problem in their words in a way that makes them feel like you are an authority in this problem that they have? And then step three is, can you show them how you're going to help them solve your problem? You're going to help them solve their problem. And oh, by the way, you happen to use your product to do that. So the product is actually the last part of the sale. The first part of the sale is getting really clear on who are the customers that have the problem you solve. Are those customers problem aware? Are they looking for a solution? And do they feel like you're the kind of person that can help them solve that problem? And if all those things are true, then the rest of the sale is really easy. But if you go with the opposite approach, it's like, we built this product, the buttons are blue, we have this integration, we're a Y Combinator company, or we're funded by Andreessen Horowitz. Like, nobody cares about that stuff.
Right.
They only care about, I've got this problem, can you solve it? If you can, let's talk. If not, delete.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think of an example there of, if you take like Gatorade, for example, I think, what does it say? It says thirst quencher or something, right? There's a problem someone has, they want to go further, faster. And I know there's been some adaptations about Gatorade, over time, but when it was originally developed with the Florida Gators, which is why it's called Gatorade, they didn't say, hey, it's water with sugar in it, come buy it, right? There's nothing about who it helps you become or what it helps you do or the evolution of how it helps you today in the problem you're having, So when you think about product positioning, it really is about that problem and how you can speak their language. You know what I mean? It's so important. Otherwise, you miss the mark. You could say the same thing, but really misunderstand it. I think learned this through one of your workshops that you said is really there's 4 conversations that happen, and you may have gotten it from someone else, but it always sticks with me where there's what you said, there's what you think you said, there's what they heard, and there's what they think they heard, and those are all different conversations that happen at the same time. And so if we don't use the words that bring consensus and understanding between your company and how you can serve somebody, it's going to be hard to convert. It's going to be hard to get those calls scheduled even.
Yeah, I'm a huge, I really like using the consumer-based world for examples because it's so clear and acute when you see it, when you mention Gatorade or Nike or Apple or any of these big brands. The psychological effect is exactly the same in that they're selling the outcome, they're selling the aspiration. And that's ultimately what we need to do in the enterprise world. It's just a different way of approaching it because you're dealing with software and demos and 16 decision makers and stakeholders that all have to get on board with the value proposition. So you're absolutely right. I think I always tell our clients, like if you're ever lost in a sales opportunity, maybe you met somebody at a conference and then you talked to them after the conference and then you had a couple demos and all of a sudden the deal went dead. You're like what happened? I thought like the conference conversation was so great and the booth conversation was awesome and the demo was spectacular. It was our best deck ever. Well, the very first thing you can do is just go back and just really look at those conversations and ask yourself, like, are we clear on the problem that we're trying to solve for this customer? Like, did they tell us that they have this problem and that they need to solve it?
Mm-hmm.
Because one, we could, if you take the product-led approach, which is, I'm at the booth, look at this cool thing, let's get on a call, let me do a demo. You're showing product. You're not really understanding the problem. So that's the obvious mistake. The second mistake, which is a little bit more nuanced, which is you might be selling to the problem, but are you the one that's telling them about the problem versus are they telling you about the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you say, hey, we solve this problem for people like you, then you're being prescriptive about the problem and then obviously being prescriptive about the solution with your product. What we've got to do when we're selling is getting all the way down to the customer, the prospect telling us, I have this problem. This is why this is important. If I don't solve this problem, it's going to cost me this. If I do solve this problem, I'm going to get Y.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, psychologically, if the first step to solving any problem is admitting you have a problem. And in a sales situation and in a product situation, it's easy to be prescriptive about like, oh, I bet you have this problem, or we solve this kind of problem for companies just like you. But we've got to get the customers to tell us so that they know that we understand them. And frankly, so we know that they're actually qualified to make a purchase because people love seeing new tech. People love seeing demos. People love talking to the cool new company. But if there's no sale here, then what's the point of all that work?
Yeah. I mean, if you were to take customers of, let's say, Nicorette gum that help people quit smoking, and you go to a group of people who think it's totally fine to smoke and they don't see a problem with it and they don't think there's any health ramifications, it's going to be very hard to convince them that, hey, one, there's a problem, and two, you should chew this gum or take this patch or whatever. It's so important to catching somebody in, that's aware of the problem, that understands, the ramifications if they don't stop or they don't solve it. You could be speaking to the right people, but at the wrong stage of that journey, right? They could not be aware of the problem. And then you're really looking at, hey, to work on the top of this funnel, that's why education is so important and awareness is so important. And some of these things that are further up, to build, I guess the case for people once they come down and you're really having those true sales conversations and they are qualified, that you're on the same page, right? They've been so-called indoctrinated with the way that you approach it, and they understand from your point of view. You're seeing eye to eye, essentially.
Well, that's a really good example of using the consumer world. Like, as you were just sharing that example, Andrew, I just Google searched Nicorette gum, and on the Google search, the tag underneath, where it says add nicorette.com, and then it describes the site underneath that. I forget what that tag is called, the header tag or whatever that's called. It says, along with support, increases your chances of quitting and delivers craving relief. Like, they are very clearly addressing people who want to quit. They're talking about how they know how hard it is, like, along with support.
Yep.
Your cravings, they're talking about those things.
They've tried to quit
because they know, like, those are the people that are searching Nicorette gum. People like, I want to quit, but I don't know how. I need help. Versus, like you said, if it just said, are you smoking 12 packs of cigarettes a day? Some people might not care if they're packing 12 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
So, it always goes back to the problem. And so, like I said, if you're ever lost in a sales opportunity trying to figure out why it stalled or why it didn't go through, just ask yourself, did we get really clear on the problem and why that customer wants to solve it?
Yeah, I think part of that, I'm not looking at the same title tags or the SEO, but I think part of that too is just understanding that somebody who's choosing Nicorette gum has either been referred by somebody, has maybe aware of it, or has tried to actually quit on their own, right? And they know how painful it is. And I think a lot of that, in software, you want to make sure that people are investing their own time, their own reputation, their own money in trying to solve some of those problems already by looking at substitutes, looking at, how they're using Excel spreadsheets, how they're using other things to really solve that problem, to prove that it's painful enough that they're aware of it. They've tried certain things. They've got buy-in from their company on other solutions maybe that missed the mark. And now you kind of have this opportunity where they're aware of it. They've tried other solutions or other things in the market that haven't worked, and they're kind of looking to you. So when as a startup, as a SaaS company, you come to them and you're talking about the features, you're going to miss the mark because you're not talking about the pain they have or the problem they have that they are really close to.
Yeah, and that goes back again, thinking about like where most companies fail with selling, most startups in particular, is number one, it's the problem, but then number two, as a way to remedy that, if you have a lot of deals in the pipeline and you're finding, okay, all these deals are stacking up, I've got a big pipeline, but nothing's converting. I think the tendency is to say, well, maybe if I just offer them a price discount, or I give them a really great deal,
Mm-hmm.
or I try to push the deal through to conversion. I'm at what I think is the late stage of the sale, and I'm trying to do something to get them to take action. Chances are there's nothing we can do to motivate them. The real problem is probably that we didn't qualify them the right way earlier in the sales process.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there really isn't urgency here. Maybe they're seeing that, yeah, they're problem aware, like they know this thing is costing them time or money with using spreadsheets and manual process. But yeah, it's a problem, but it's not a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
For us. I remember being at one of the lenders that we worked with at Blend early on. I was in a room with a couple C-level executives, and they were talking about other places to implement our software within the company. And they were talking amongst themselves, and they basically had like a whiteboard where they listed out a bunch of different situations, places in their company where they thought we might be able to help them. And one of the executives said, well, what about this? And then he explained the problem. And the chief risk officer looked at him and said, you know what? That's only a $10 million problem. That's not a now thing. And I will never forget hearing that's only a $10 million problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a now thing, because it just wasn't the priority for them.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of other problems that were $100 million problems. And if you're selling to a big company, $10 million problem just may not be a big problem for them right now. They might be aware. They're certainly aware they have this problem, but the perception was that this problem isn't big enough for us to spend time on it.
Yeah, I think that's part of, trying to understand more of beyond your solution. What does this person's day look like? What are they responsible for? What other things are kind of in the vein of their role, their responsibilities, the problems that company's having? I think helps put it in perspective. If you have a bunch of $100 million problems barking at you, and you have a couple people come along with $10 million, it's big to you, but to them, relative.
Yeah,
they're going to solve the $100 million problem. Their responsibilities to do that. So I think it's good to understand the scale of problems and how those stack up. What advice would you have, Scott, for somebody looking to, start their own company? Let's say it's a B2B SaaS company and they're looking to get started. Well, how would you kind of coach them, or what recommendations would you have for how they would get started selling and understanding whether or not their customers have this problem that they're looking to solve?
Well, I would, I'm biased, but I would default back to first, you want to have a hypothesis around, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve and how do we think it needs to be solved? Have a hypothesis around that product. And even if you build something rudimentary, a wireframe or some kind of baseline MVP, I think the tendency is, I think we all know, hey, you should go out and talk to customers, do customer discovery, do customer development, learn from the market, and you should do all those things. Where I think a lot of founders miss an opportunity is, when you have a wireframe, if you've got somebody who's there and says like, yes, I have this problem, and yes, like I need to take action. It's easy to sort of get scared to ask for the business, because you're like, oh, the product's not built yet, or the product's not done. Like, well, when is it ever done?
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity there to really test how interested somebody is in buying the product, because it's easy for someone to go, yeah, if you built that, I would definitely buy it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in that conversation, you say, great. So we're in the development cycle now. We're working with a great team of developers that are going to help us build the first version of this product. We think we're expecting it to be ready in, by the end of next quarter. We're taking pre-orders now for the first round, the first cohort of users that are going to use this product, because the first 10 customers that we have, we're actually not going to just deliver the product, but we're also going to, personally consult with you to make sure you're understanding how to use it. We're going to show you how to use the data. We're going to come do workshops on site and teach your team. So yeah, you're buying the product and you're also going to get all of our expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because we're going to be doing a lot of that alongside buying the product, we can only support 10 customers this year. So you're, in this sense, you're using scarcity as a way to show like, hey, I'm not saying I need your credit card just because I want to get your credit card. You're saying like, this is real scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
We can only support 10. Product's going to be ready in 3 months. We've got a really clear roadmap on it. So if you want to be one of those 10, then what's the best way for us to get a deposit from you? Or who would we talk to about getting a contract in place so that when we do launch, you guys can hit the ground running and be one of those 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a matter of like, ask for the business, because that's the only way to truly know. And economists have proven this. The only way to know whether or not somebody is really willing to pay is to ask them to pay
Mm-hmm.
and then make them pay.
Right.
Because if you only ask them to pay, if they would pay, lots of people will say yes. But when you actually ask for the money, that's where you're going to find out who's real and who's not. So for anybody that's out there at the early stages and you've got this product, even if it's a wireframe or an MVP, and you're showing it to people and they're interested and they say they would buy it, then ask for the business.
Yeah, I would
and start seeing whether or not they were willing to pay you money, because that's what you'll know if you have problem product fit.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, the most successful companies at the early stage that we've worked with do that and understand that. I think it's when you get too proud of, oh, the product's not perfect or this isn't perfect. Like, you can sell on a concept. You can sell on the value proposition that you've created, that you've outlined in a wireframe or in a prototype. I think the other kind of caveat to that is just making sure that founders understand that you don't have to discount. So yeah, I noticed you didn't mention, hey, since it's early, we're going to discount this pilot. What you're doing is you're adding more value on top of it, right? Rather than saying, hey, like, you're just getting the software, you're going to get all these added benefits and this added value that's going to help, you go further. And then the price kind of becomes a little bit irrelevant, essentially because you're adding so much more value. And one thing that, we've learned from you is price is only objection in the absence of value, right? So if you can provide more value, I think that's super important. And, we preach this to our clients too, when they come to us and say, hey, I have an idea and I want to launch it. And if you build it, they'll come, I guarantee it. We have to pump the brakes and really understand, how do we test this and how do we take credit cards essentially? So, B2C, we're putting forth landing pages, we're running Facebook ads, we're running email tests, and really try to engage people so that they'll prove that they'll part with their money. Because, as you said, that's one of the only ways to actually guarantee the behavior that somebody says. They'll lie to you with the best intentions.
Well, so a great story about taking credit cards. The founder of Altos Research, a guy named Mike Simonson, he was telling me about his first sale. He was working from Red Rock Cafe in Mountain View, California. This is, going back to 2010. And he was calling real estate agents about this product he built. And somebody said, hey, this looks cool. You're like, how much? And he's like, $50 a month. Just like had never thought about the price question because he'd never gotten that far. And the agent said, great, sign me up. So what do you need, like a credit card or something? And he goes, yeah. So he just took out a notebook and wrote down the guy's credit card number on a piece of paper. And then after he took the credit card, then he figured out, well, how the hell am I going to process payment? I guess that's when he set up PayPal and processed the payment.
Yeah.
And so like, you don't have to have this fancy price engine and all that stuff built out. And to your point about discounts, we just had this in a coaching call this morning with a founder who's going through his first 10 customers right now. And we talked about, like, should I discount? He even asked, should I call it an early bird discount? I said, no. What we do is you say, look, here's the price. Here's the implementation, what's going to cost to implement. Here's the per usage fee. Here's the dashboard fee, all that stuff. And he said, well, what if people like later on find out that I moved up prices? Are they going to want the discount, the lower price? And I said, no, what you tell people is like, this is the price today. This is the least expensive it's ever going to be, because I already know in 6 months' time, at the end of this year, we're going to be at least doubling or tripling prices. And so we're offering this to you now because we want to know who the fast movers are in this market. We want to work with people like you. So if you want to take advantage of this fast mover discount, then you can do that. But these prices are only good for the next 60 days. And after that, we're already looking at price increases. And ultimately, at the end of the day, to your point about value is, look, when you solve this problem, you're going to get all this other outcome
Mm-hmm.
in terms of revenue and more hospital beds filled and all the other problems they solve, which is a huge downstream revenue effect for them. So yeah, it's the price conversation is really about what value are you creating, and that value you're creating is really goes back to what's the problem we're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
If we solve that problem, what do you get? If I help you get there, then you should have no problems whatsoever paying the price that I'm asking you to pay.
Yeah, that's great. So Scott, where can people follow you and learn more about Scott, SalesQualia, all the things?
Best thing to do, I always point people, pretty 1999-ish, but like, hey, go to the website. And the reason I tell people to go to our website, which is SalesQualia, QUALIA.com, because right at the homepage, there's a place where people can download a copy of my most recent book. So I've written 3 books now, and the most recent one is called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling: How to Build Your B2B Startups Repeatable Revenue Using the Q Framework. So it's a book that I published in June of last year. And if people want to get a copy, the easiest thing to do, go to the website, click on the link that you see in the middle of the homepage, and you can download an entire PDF version of the book. It's not like free copy plus shipping. It's a completely free copy, the PDF. And so they give you a chance to check out what we've got on the website, plus read more about how we think about the sales process and how we build that with our clients every day. And so that's what I'd say you do. Go over to salesqualia.com.
Yeah, that sounds great. I recommend you do that. I was telling Scott before we hit record here, I've gotten quite a few copies of the hard copy book and given away to friends and founders I know that are looking to create a framework and a process around their sales and really how to think about, how do they treat their product as a business and sell first and build the product as they go.